I want to introduce you to one of my great friends and a person who I admire and am still annoyed that she won't quit her job and go to work for me. But if you could come on up here, Erin. I want to introduce you guys to Erin Palacio. Erin is absolutely an amazing individual. She was born and raised in the Texas Panhandle and is proud to call Amarillo home with her husband, Mark, and her two awesome daughters, Tori and Taryn. She stumbled into the world of human resources by accident, as most HR people do, 17 years ago, and has never looked back. She often says that she never intended to go into HR after obtaining her MBA, but is grateful and thankful for such a rewarding career in a field that is never dull and absolutely never boring. She got her start at Amarillo College, then went on to Wayland Baptist University, where she earned both her undergrad and her graduate degree. When she isn't working in HR, she's a full-time after-school taxi driver, or Uber if you're a little more modern, to her daughters, and an avid amateur photographer. An amateur might be a stretch, because she is so pro. She is amazing at photography. She is a cake decorator and one of the best that I have ever seen, and a jogger who sometimes runs. Didn't you run like 120 miles in a month or something ridiculous?
Yeah.
So she's a part of the Junior League of Amarillo. She serves local organizations and high school students, obtaining a better understanding of careers and how the choices they make them. Please help me welcome Erin Palacio.
Hey guys. Okay. Uh-oh. All right. So that you guys know a little bit about me, my name is Erin Palacio. I currently serve the city of Amarillo in the HR department as the HR manager, and I love that position. It is probably one of the most challenging positions I have ever held, and I am grateful for that. I tell everybody, what better way to serve my city than to work for the city and serve the employees that make the city run on a daily basis. And so I'm super excited to be doing that. Born and raised here in Amarillo. My husband and I met going to college at night at Wayland Baptist University. A little funny story is I met Jody. My youngest daughter is 12. And I remember meeting Jody on my first day back from maternity leave, where I was not really thrilled to be back at work. I was leaving my 10-week-old baby, and I was not real thrilled to be back at work. And my boss at the time said, "Hey, I need you to meet with this Jody." And I was like, great, right? But little did I know that 12 years later, Jody and I'd have a great friendship. We've worked together on many different levels over the years, and I am always honored when he comes in or he asks me to speak to y'all. And so it's always on something fun. This year when I got the text that said, "Hey, do you want to speak?" I was like, awesome. What are we going to talk about this year? He threw out a couple of subjects, and I was like, you know what? I just had a conversation yesterday with a leader about managing. Why are you leading people? And that was one of the topics that he threw out at me. And I was like, let's talk about that, right? How many of you in here are responsible formally for leading a team, right? Okay, I see a majority of you, okay? How many of you have thought about your why? Why am I leading, right? Okay, that's a very important question. How many of you have heard of an author, Patrick Lencioni? How many of you have read his books? Okay, they are really good books. How many of you like to read? Okay, a few of you, some of you, okay. His books are written in one of the easiest formats to read. They're written in short stories, and they're relatively small. So this is his book, and it's called The Motive. It's one of his most recent books. It's also one of his shortest books. So if you're not a reader, you just know that this is one of his shortest books. Not very big, right? Very, very powerful. And the question is, why are you a leader? How many of you set out with the intent to be a leader? How How many of you are like, I'm going to school, I'm getting this job, I'm working my way up, I'm gonna rule the world, I'm gonna be a leader, right? Some of us had that inspiration, right? What was it like when you got there? Was it everything you've ever imagined? Everything was roses, right? What were you met with? Challenges, right? I had a conversation, and I've had several of these conversations over the course of my time in HR with leaders. Do you like people? Right? If you don't like people, can you be an effective leader? Right? People are messy, right? There are good days, there are bad days. You have to like people. I once had a manager tell me, if I didn't have to manage people, I would really like my job. Right? So then we had a long conversation about if you don't like people, if you don't want to help your team grow, if you don't see potential, if you don't want to have those hard conversations with people, why are you leading? And the hard part for people to understand is you may get into it and it is not for you, but we stay, right? And when we stay and we don't really enjoy it, what kind of leader are we? Not good. How effective are our teams? Right? We stress, right? We're stressed, our team's stressed, nobody's happy, you have lots of turnover. How many of you can think of a good boss? What were the qualities that good boss had? Y'all just throw some stuff out at me. Care, trust, listen. Humility. What was that? Awesome. Guys, have you ever, another Patrick Lencioni book, since somebody said humility. Have you ever read The Ideal Team Player? Okay, if you've read that book, and if not, I encourage you to go get The Motive, and then I encourage you to go get The Ideal Team Player, okay? Because it talks about being humble, hungry, and smart, right? That makes an ideal team player. It also makes an ideal leader, right? So let's talk about this. What is your leadership motive? Are you in it for reward? Or are you in it for responsibility? Right? I'm not going to make you raise your hands, but think about that. Are you in it because it's your crowning achievement? And you're like, I've arrived. I no longer have to do anything. I have people to do it for me, right? Have you ever known a leader like that? Like, I don't want to be bothered with the messy stuff. I don't like this meeting, so Joe, go do it for me, right? I don't want to attend this. I don't want to do that. And I'm the leader. I've arrived. I've put my time in, and I don't have to, right? Reward leaders most often fail. Their teams are not successful because they're in it for them. As a leader, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to lead that team, to grow that team, to make them better than they were when they arrived. How do you do that? Right? So we have reward and responsibility leaders. We're going to talk about reward today. We're a little bit, because we're going to ask you some questions to determine which one you are. And as a leader, guess what? You can kind of go back and forth between both. You're going to end up with a dominant trait of reward or responsibility. But sometimes you go back and forth. Like, I find myself with my team, sometimes I'm just tired, right? I'm exhausted, which probably means they are too. And sometimes I'm like, I don't want to handle that. I'm going to let Susie handle that today. But is it my responsibility? Right? So Please don't be a leader unless you are doing it for the right reason. Okay, so think about your reason. Why you took the position you took. Why you want to be that leader. Okay, if it's to get to the top, right? You're more reward focused than responsibility focused, because your responsibility as a leader is to be responsible for those people who are working for you. Not just that I've arrived and I'm checking this off my list of things to do. So leadership is a privilege. Not everybody gets the opportunity. If you get the opportunity and you realize that it is not for you, there is absolutely no harm in saying this, I am not cut out to do this, and to take a step back and grow where you're effective. How many of you either have had this happen to you, or you've seen it, or maybe you did it to someone? You are the best widget maker ever. You always show up and you produce more than anybody else. And now there's this leadership position open. What happens? They're like, oh, you're so good at producing. You always get things done. We're going to make you a leader. And oftentimes what happens, we put that person in a leadership role, right? And then we give them zero training on how to do it. Every organization has done this, right? No organization is exempt from it. Just because someone is a good widget maker, right? And they can get the most produced and they show up every day, doesn't mean that's going to make them an effective leader. If you do that to someone, or you've had that done to you, leadership is a privilege. Provide people with the training they need to be successful. A lot of times we're like, here, we're going to toss you out and we hope you can swim, right? That's not helping you as a company, and it's not helping that person as a new leader. Because just because they're the best doesn't mean they're going to be the best leader. When you promote someone into that leadership role, I hope when you're interviewing them that you ask them what their motive is. Is that motive fitting in with your goals for your organization? Right? Talk to them. Why do they want to be a leader? Because leading is hard, y'all. It is hard work. It's not getting to wherever that leadership role is that you want to go and going, okay, I'm here. I can just slack off now because I've got everybody else to do the work for me, right? Leading is a privilege, and we have to look at it that way. Is it going to be fun every day? Absolutely not. But it is a privilege that we have been given, and we have a responsibility to lead our team. So throughout the course of this talk that I'm speaking on this morning, we're going to talk about your why a lot. I want you to think about it. Think about your why. Why are you leading? And we're going to go through some of the reward questions in a minute, and it's going to kind of help you figure out where you land. And you might find that you're partially part of both, right? So reward-centered leadership, right? Up at the screen here. Basically, it's a reward. I made it, I'm good, I'm done, right? What we're gonna focus on is the 5 things that reward-centered leaders fail at, okay? So, developing a leadership team. It's somebody else's responsibility. I'm at the top and I don't really have to do it anymore, right? What about managing subordinates? And if you are a leader of leaders, getting those leaders to manage those subordinates. Having difficult and uncomfortable conversations. I get this quite a bit in HR throughout the course of my life in HR. Hey, so-and-so's having problems. Can you come talk to them? I'm like, okay, who's the leader? Why are we passing the buck? Why are you not addressing this conversation? I've had managers come up and say, hey, so-and-so kind of smells. Can you talk to them about that? Because I don't really want to talk to them about wearing deodorant, right? People don't like to have difficult conversations. And then what happens when people don't have those difficult conversations is things kind of blow up. They kind of bubble under the surface, and eventually they are, the kettle boils over, right? When we don't address that. Running team meetings, okay? How many of you are like, oh, great, another meeting that I have to sit through and I don't really want to, right? Okay, another book by Patrick Lencioni is called Death by Meeting. I would suggest reading that one too. It is really good. And it's just talking about how meetings are supposed to be productive and beneficial. And if they're not, if you're having bad meetings, are you really getting good decisions out of those meetings? Sorry, I don't know why that's buzzing or ringing, right? If you're not having a good meeting, are you really getting good decisions out of that meeting? Okay, so think about that. If you go in with, oh, great, another meeting, right? Think about the decisions you're going to get out of that if your attitude going into it. Or if you're the one leading the meeting, but you're like, hey, Jane, why don't you lead this today? And as the leader, you're sitting over there on your phone, or you're reading a paper, or you're checking email, you're on Facebook, whatever it is that you're doing. But your team members see you not being engaged. What kind of message does that send, right? And then communication, and communicating constantly. Do you know it takes a person on average 7 times to hear something that you've said? Right? So if you're getting ready to push something out and you're like, God, I told them about that last week and I told them, right? On average, we have to tell somebody something 7 times in order for them to get the message. Okay? I will often send an email. I may send another email. I'm going to have a couple of conversations about it, right? And bring it up. Like things we're getting ready to implement and things we're getting ready to do in my department. A week ago, I told them about this project. I sent an email this morning, right? And I'll send another couple of emails and find other ways to communicate with them. I like to touch people in multiple ways of communication because they may not always respond to one form, right? And so over-communicate. So here's some questions. Do you feel that spending time developing your team members' interpersonal dynamics is a waste of time? Okay, this is the reward. This is where those reward-centered leaders focus. Like, it's not worth my time, right? So think about this. I'm not going to ask any of you to answer where you're at on this, but I want you to think about it, okay? Because we can change our focus, we can shift our thinking, and we can become more of a responsibility-focused leader. Sometimes we just need it brought to light. And I would say at some point in time, you're going to answer yes to these, right? Where you were that reward-centered leader versus a responsibility-centered leader, okay? Whenever somebody comes to my office and they're struggling with something that's going on their team and they just don't understand, one of the questions that I ask them, do you have regular meetings with your team? What kind of communication do you have? Do you hold one-on-ones, okay? I like to call them touch-base meetings with my team because some people have a negative connotation against one-on-one meetings. I call them touch base. Let's touch base because I want to see what's going on in their work. I want to know what's going on in their personal life if they want to tell me, right? I want to be able to get to know my employees because a lot of times when managers come in and they're frustrated with their teams, it's because they're not developing them. They're not having those conversations. They're not carving out time. If I don't make time, I let it slip. So like a couple weeks ago, about a month ago, I decided that the setup I had for my team meetings wasn't working. And I was like, I'm going to cancel all the meetings and I'll reschedule them. And it took me 2 weeks to get back to rescheduling those meetings because I didn't do it right then and I didn't intentionally put it on my calendar, right? So you have to be intentional about it because guess what? You're never going to have the time. You have to make the time. Do you organize team building activities for your team that are fun, but that largely ignore uncomfortable conversations about their collective behavior? Team building activities that are fun are great, but you also have to do team building around tough conversations. When you avoid those tough conversations, it's being selfish as a leader. That's my opinion, and you can disagree with me, but I think when you avoid those tough conversations, you're being selfish as a leader because you don't want to have that tough conversation. You don't want to do what's necessary to make your team better, and I've been there. Every one of us has, and I'll continue to do it. But then thankfully, I have a light bulb that goes off, and I'm like, okay, you know what? You've been avoiding that conversation for 2 weeks now. It's about time you pull up your pants and let's go have that conversation. Right? So think about that when you answer these questions. All right. Okay. Do you feel that providing individual guidance and coaching to your people is somehow beneath you or not worth your time? Okay? As a leader, you are there to coach and guide through good times and bad times. Okay? It is your responsibility. Don't slack on that. Do you feel that you should be able to trust them to manage themselves? I have said this before. I'm like, I didn't hire them for me to micromanage them. I hired them because they were good at what they're doing so that I didn't have to manage them, right? Make sure you checking in with your employees, asking them what they've got on their plate, coaching them through things that they need, checking in to make sure there's anything that they need from you. That is not micromanaging. That is caring. Because a lot of times employees don't want to come to you as a leader and tell you they're struggling, they're falling behind, they're not reaching this, ask them, okay? Build those relationships with your employees, and then you're a responsible leader, okay? Do you justify not knowing what your direct reports are doing by claiming not wanting to be a micromanager? So I just talked about that, right? Checking in with them and saying, hey, is there anything you need from me? Can I do anything for you? What do you have on your plate this week? Hey, did you follow up on this case? Right? You need to know. And that's not micromanaging. It's caring, and it's being a responsible leader. Would you rather learn to live with a person's difficult behaviors than endure an awkward, potentially emotional discussion with them? I am going to ask you to raise your hands. How many of you have avoided a conversation because you didn't want to have it? It was going to be uncomfortable. I was going to have to tell them that something wasn't going right. Right? It is so important to have those difficult conversations with your employees. Because what happens is when you don't have those difficult conversations with your employees and the problem is allowed to persist, one, you get really frustrated. Your team's really frustrated because you're not addressing the problem that everybody knows. Like everybody sees the elephant in the room, right? But nobody's addressing it. And then all of a sudden it blows up and you're in HR, right? And then we're talking through it and trying to figure out the best way to address it. And hopefully nobody threw punches, right? That happens. I'm sure you guys are aware of that, but occasionally coworkers like to throw punches at each other, right? And it's as a leader, we could see it coming. We didn't want to have that difficult conversation. So I encourage my leaders, my managers, my frontline supervisors, directors, whatever your leadership title is, to come to me or one of the girls in my office and let's talk through it. Let's role play. Those difficult conversations are hard to have, but let's role play. Let's give you some helpful hints on how to word things so you're not pissing them off the first second they walk in the door, right? okay? You cannot avoid those difficult and uncomfortable conversations. And do you find yourself venting about your direct reports' behavior issues rather than talking with them directly? Okay, how many of you have ever said, oh my gosh, this is just driving me crazy. I don't know what to do with them. They're making my life miserable, but we haven't talked to them. They don't even know they're making your life miserable. One of the things I always say in HR is what you allow becomes acceptable, right? If you allow the behavior to continue, it becomes acceptable until you readdress it and help them through it, right? Because we don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations. We have the wrong motive for leading. Things can get pretty hairy. All right, team meetings. How many of you like meetings? Occasionally, one, woohoo, right? Because you're having fun. How many of you just see meetings as a necessary evil to get through the day, right? Some of us do. As a leader, how do you make your meetings productive and engaging? It's not by sitting on your cell phone, and it's not by delegating it to somebody else, and it's not responding to emails because you just absolutely can't let that email sit for 30 minutes before you respond to it, okay? One of the things that I tell my leaders, make sure you give your undivided attention when you are holding a meeting. So when I have meetings with my team, I don't bring my cell phone. If it happens to be in my office, I forward my phone. I lock my computer so I can't see the little email box popping up. And I tell my receptionist, if it is life or death, you can come get me. But unless it is life or death, I'll deal with it when I get done with this meeting in an hour, right? Make sure that your team meetings are productive, that they're engaging, that people don't go, oh my gosh, here's another meeting with Erin. We're not going to get anything done, but we're going to sit here and talk for 30 minutes and waste my time. I've got better things to be doing, right? If you're not having good team meetings, the decisions coming out of those meetings are not going to be good. Do you ever resent having to repeat yourself? I already told them that, right? This is where the 7 times that I mentioned earlier, you have to make sure that you're communicating your message multiple ways and multiple times. Do not think I've told them once, they should know this. Your responsibility as a leader is to make sure they got the message. And if you have to repeat it 7 times, repeat it 7 times. Oftentimes leaders are like, done that, okay, off to the next thing. What else can I talk about? Have you ever had anybody say the flavor of the month? Like, let's see what the flavor of the month is this month. What are we talking about this month, right? Because leaders want to communicate and move on. As a responsible leader, you're going to know that it takes at least 7 times for people to get your message. Even if you're not a leader. I do this with my kids all the time. I'm like, I told you last night, right? You can use it in your personal life too, 7 times, okay? So you have to communicate constantly and repetitively, repeatedly to employees. So I encourage you guys, 1, to go get the book, The Motive, or to Google it, or Audible, right? I listen to a lot of books on Audible. I encourage you guys to get the book. I encourage you to sit down, allow yourself some time to answer those questions and see where you fall on the leadership scale. Are you reward-centered or are you responsibility-centered? You need to be able to write out your motive for leading. You need to know why you're there. So I encourage you to get that book. The Ideal Team Player is another phenomenal book because you need to be hungry, right? You need to be humble and you need to be smart. And by smart, I'm not talking about book smart. I'm talking about your emotional intelligence, those skills where you can interact effectively with people. You know how to say things to get things out of people and engage them, right? So those 2 books are, I think, some of the best books I've read on leadership. And it made me think about my why. Literally write out your why and then refine it. And you're going to grow and change over the course of time. And you're going to find yourself maybe teetering back and forth. Sometimes you've slipped and you've become more reward focused than responsibility focused. Leadership is hard work. So it is not for the faint of heart. I encourage you to stay strong. I encourage you to keep attending meetings like this, listen to podcasts, read books, engage with people you find successful, and take them to lunch and say, hey, I'm having this problem. Can we talk about it? Build your network. I'm always here to help you guys. If you ever need anything, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can email me. I'm always here to help. And I use people all the time. I'm like, hey, I'm emotionally tied to this situation. I need your help. So as a leader, recognize when you need help. Recognize your motive. And every time you start to go off track and go more towards that, I've earned this, I don't have to do this, remember you have a responsibility, and pull yourself back to responsibility. Thank you guys so much.
I left all of my stuff up here a while ago. It's the easiest thing to do when you finish speaking to go, all right, I'm done, and I'm walking off of here. And by the time you're at the end of a conference like this, you've got 19 people's stuff on the back of the stage. Erin did a great job. I love Patrick Lencioni. I love that book. She talked through the motive. Some of the other books that Lencioni's written that I think are fantastic are The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Talk about the way that teams evolve and how we become who we're supposed to be. And then another one that I really like of his is called 3 Signs of a Miserable Job. He has the best book titles of anybody that I've ever read. I'd like to meet him, but I've read all of his stuff. I don't think he's written a single book that I haven't read yet.